Total Screen proudly presents their official podcast, On Screen, with your hosts, Tyson Gifford and William Rohrig. Hello, everybody, and welcome to On Screen, the official podcast of the Total Screen. My name is Tyson.
My name is Will.
And today, this week, we are going to take a little break from The Last of Us. We're going to come back next week to cover the 2 episodes that will have aired by that time. But this week, we're taking a week off because we want to talk about John Wick. So yeah, this is from 2014, but we said we want to talk about this, its influence on other movies. We want to just talk a little bit about all of that stuff. And so that's going to be our main topic tonight. But first, we have our On the Horizon segment. On the Horizon is where we talk about stuff that's coming up in the next week or so. And we got a few big ones coming up this week. So, starting with Wednesday, March 1st, The Mandalorian returns on Disney+. Then on Wednesday, March 1st, True Lies comes to CBS. So yeah, get your laughter out of the way.
Yeah, they're making a TV series about that.
Yeah.
Just watch the movie, people. It's got Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's got Jamie Lee Curtis.
But have you seen the masterful product placement that these CBS shows do?
No. I haven't watched the CBS show
lived.
in forever.
You haven't lived.
The last time I watched, I think the last time I watched the show on CBS was literally the second season of Supergirl, when that was a CBS show before they moved it to the CW. It was like, okay.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying, you haven't lived till you've seen CBS product placement. Then on Friday, March 3rd, Daisy Jones and the Six, which is a mini-series, comes to Amazon Prime. It's about a fictional band over the course of decades, and it's got a bunch of original music that's being written for it. Kind of has like a Almost Famous vibe to it, if you remember that movie.
Oh, yeah.
Then on Friday, March 3rd, The Last of Us comes out to PC. Also on Friday, March 3rd, Wo Long Final Dynasty comes out to PC, PS4, PS5, Xbox One, and Xbox Series X.
Yep, that's going to be good.
Creed 3 comes out the same day in theaters, and Hunt Her, Kill Her, which is a horror movie about home invaders stalking a woman, that comes out also on March 3rd, on Friday, in theaters. And that is it for our On the Horizon segment, and that brings us to our main topic, full spoilers. As I mentioned, this week on Full Spoilers, we are going to be discussing the 2014 movie John Wick. So I'd seen this a while ago. I'll tell you the story of how I learned about John Wick. Besides just seeing random commercials here and there and not really knowing if it was good or anything. My story was I was at a bar because one of my friends was moving out of town. And so it was kind of like our going away party for him at this bar. And there was somebody at the bar that I don't think was with that group. He just happened to be there. And he just kept talking about John Wick. And he kept pulling out his phone and showing clips and trailers to everybody on his phone in the bar, where you couldn't hear shit because it was so loud. And he just kept showing trailers and stuff for John Wick and making us promise that we would watch it and stuff. It was one of those like weird experiences. And so like maybe a week later, I saw that it was on like, some streaming service or something. And I just watched it and said, oh, it is actually really good. And around maybe a couple months after that, that's when he started getting all that John Wick mania, where like all of a sudden everybody was talking about John Wick, and he started hearing about all these other movies that were going to be influenced by John Wick. So you just saw this recently. Did it meet or exceed or fall short of your expectations based on what you knew about it?
It met my expectations. Well, it was built up as this fantastic action film and delivered on being that. I mean, I can't really say it disappointed me.
So what's interesting is that John Wick was directed by two folks, who I can't pronounce the last names of, so I'm just gonna say Chad and David.
Chad and David, okay.
Chad was, Keanu Reeves' stunt double in The Matrix. And he's kind of like the main director of the franchise. David went on to direct Deadpool 2 and Bullet Train recently. So he's kind of like stylized action director. He, I think, is maybe not credited on John Wick, but he co-directed it. But I don't think he was involved after the first one. So only the first one. And this was written by Derek Kolstad, who also wrote Nobody, which is one of the movies that's kind of like heavily inspired by John Wick. So yeah, it's the same person writing, makes sense.
Right, yeah.
I think what's interesting about John Wick is that it's pretty tropey.
Yeah,
but it picked like the right tropes and the right amount to hit on those tropes to be like a successful formula. They kind of hit on the things like, you know, you have the scene where the hero like isn't wearing a shirt and has like crazy looking tattoos. Yeah. And you're like, ooh, those tattoos must have a story, right? You have like the kind of underworld stuff with like the gold coins and the kind of like the crime stuff. Almost reminded me a little bit of like Looper.
That was interesting too.
Without the time travel.
Like the way like they inserted lore into it, like a universe into it. There's like this underground community of assassins now, and it's like, it's a bigger world than just like John Wick. So it's a smart way to set itself up for sequels and stuff, to hint at something larger than just the simple revenge story about this one man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of world building, a lot of like kind of hidden mythos in there of like just these little elements of things, these little iconographies, like the gold coins and the hotel with the rules and you know, like there's all these little kind of things that kind of play on that.
Yeah.
And then it also became like the next movie to really move forward like gunfights. And by that I don't just mean like shootouts, but like where like guns are being used more like dramatically in fights than like a typical shootout would. And this is something that you saw get started with things like John Woo, the director. You'd start seeing like, oh, now you have movies where people are diving and they have a gun in each hand and they're shooting, and you have these dramatic gunfight scenes. Then you had like movies like Equilibrium, where they made like gun kata, where like guns were being used in like a martial art of sorts, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
And this is kind of like the next evolution of that, which is where guns are being used oftentimes in close range, and it's all about brutalism. It's all about like deadly efficiency.
Yes.
It's like Krav Maga with guns.
Yeah.
It's just straight like punch the person in the face and shoot him in the face, and then, you know, like, it's all about like the most effective way to like eliminate targets.
Yeah.
And I think this comes from the fact that this was a movie directed by stuntmen and stunt coordinators, were the people that created this movie.
In a funny way, it makes it seem more realistic, because it's like getting into like these long drawn out fights with like 5 people. He takes them out as quick as he can, because realistically, you can't like have a fist fight with 5 people at once, no matter how awesome you are. So
yeah.
You know, he's still an unstoppable badass. He's still doing like impossible shit, but makes it seem like less absurd, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's brutalism. It's like, it's very much the idea of, I'm fighting a guy, we both dived behind a wall, you can still shoot through the fucking wall.
Yeah.
You know, like, or like, we're walking past somebody, if I drop low, I can shoot them in the ankles, they'll drop low, and then I can shoot them in the head. Kinda, it's like that kind of stuff. It's all about how do you more effectively kill people. And that's kind of what the stunts and stuff are all about in this movie, in the series, or like, you could even say in the genre of John Wick likes that are out now. It's all about that kind of like brutal efficiency. And that makes sense if this comes from stunt performers, because you have to imagine, if you're a stunt performer, you know how to fight, you know how you fall, you know what it feels like when you take a fall, you know like how to shoot a gun, you know, these things are things that you're very familiar with, they're your trade. And as you're like making movies and you're like a stuntman for another director or something, you're probably building up like a long stack of complaints of like, this isn't realistic, this is silly, this is stupid. And so if you go from that to being a director, it's going to make sense that you're going to implement all of that knowledge you have. All these things that were like, that you thought were stupid are going to be the things you're not going to do. It's kind of similar to me to like the Battlestar Galactica remake. The guys that did it used to work on Star Trek shows. And so the first thing they did is they said, okay, no utopia, no like evenly lit every room. Like, you know, like they basically made like a rule book saying like, okay, we're not going to do any of this shit. These are the things that we got fed up with when we were doing Trek because they were kind of unrealistic. And we're just going to eschew all of that. And it kind of feels the same way here. Like you have to imagine like they kind of made a rule book for how they were going to film this movie. And they had to like basically say, okay, yeah, none of this bullshit, none of that bullshit. They do not just gunfights really well, but there's really good knife fights. There's lots of good use of like jiu-jitsu or like, you know, basically MMA style fighting and like just for effectiveness, you know, like doing arm bars and things like that. And then tying that in with guns and like close range gun violence. Cause it's not about shooting people from a distance. Most of the people he's killing are like point blank, you know?
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy. Like that, it becomes part of like a martial art almost, or the guns are like an extension of that. I think the thing I like even more than that though is like the knife fights and stuff where they'll like stab somebody and then start like hitting the knife to dive it in deeper, you know?
Yes.
Things like that. It's like, it's so brutal, but it strikes of like a realism. Like if you ever hear about people who are stabbed or shanked in like prison, they don't stab them like once and run away. They like stab them like as many times as they can in a short period of time. You know, it's very violent, repetitive, and quick. And that's kind of like what we're getting here with like the knife fights and stuff in John Wick. It's super brutal. It's relentless, but it's like the way it probably would be if this kind of situation was real.
Yeah, exactly. It's very cool. And also I think the movie helps because obviously they cast Keanu Reeves as the lead and he is a very charismatic person. He's a very charismatic lead. So
he's also perfect for this because he's somebody that's good when he has like few words.
Yes.
He's good at like kind of making use of a small number of words and really nailing them, you know?
So you're just willing to go along with him, you know, like
Yeah, and they set up like, you know, an easy, it's kind of like almost cheap that the way they set up like a reason for you to get on his side for what he's going to be doing, which is just like you see in like this kind of very quickly put together, like almost like just vignettes that show you, oh, his wife died. Oh, his wife sent him a dog, like a puppy. Before she died, she sent for him to get a puppy and because she didn't want him to be alone.
And then Theon Greyjoy kills the puppy.
Yeah. And so you get this kind of like, I mean, right off the way, if you kill an animal, you're gonna like get the audience on your side against the people that kill the animal. You know?
Oh, yeah. It's been well tested. You could kill people off in movies all day long. It's like you kill an animal and the audience is against you.
Yeah.
So that is a very easy and cheap way to get the audience on John Wick's side, but it freaking works.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about like the effectiveness and the stunts and then the use of guns and knives and stuff. It's the same thing with the storytelling in this. Everything's very obvious, but it's also very effective.
Yeah.
It's like that's kind of like, I guess like the word to describe this movie is effect, you know? It's economical. It's very like, okay, we need to hit these points. How do we hit these points as hard as we fucking can? And that's what this movie does.
The interesting thing is like, this movie is not subtle with anything it does at all. Like, yeah, we just talked how they get you to sympathize with the main character, with the protagonist, but then the way they like build him up as a badass, again, no subtlety. They could have just did it suggestively, but there is suggestion, but then they layer on top of that by having the villains freak out and go on like entire monologues about how badass John Wick actually is. Like,
oftentimes with like subtitles that are like really dramatic looking and stuff to really like draw your attention. It kind of reminds me of like when you play a Nintendo game and like the way they'll have the keywords like in a different color or something.
Yeah.
It's like they'd have the subtitles and then they'd say like Baba Yaga or like a huge font, that one word. Or like different things like that, like when they really want to emphasize a point, you know? It just really has that kind of like Nintendo video game dialogue language style to it, you know?
Yeah. It's just like everything in this movie hits you like a sledgehammer. Like,
yeah, definitely. But it's so fun and it's so effective, and when everything's just done really right and things pace pretty quickly and you just give them just enough to think about, which is mostly the world building stuff, to make you go like, oh, I wonder how this works in this world or this environment, just to keep you like intrigued as they're kind of hitting you over the head with all these obvious things.
Yes.
That's, like I said, it's economical. It's like they're taking the least amount that they can do for the maximum amount of effect they can have.
And like, again, it really helps that like all this is shouldered by like some strong performances by some great actors. I mean, you got Keanu Reeves, you got Willem Dafoe. Willem Dafoe's freaking great in this. You got Ian McShane, Lance Reddick.
Ian McShane is brilliant. Lance Reddick, I first noticed Lance Reddick in like Lost, and then like, you know, saw him in things like The Wire and stuff. He's so good in that kind of like mysterious kind of role. He's just like quietly efficient and to the point. And he's so good in that role. So he's entertaining. Ian McShane is just, he's awesome. You know, he hams up the scene like he did in Deadwood, basically. Every scene he's in, he's the star, you know? Yeah, you also got, as you mentioned, Theon Greyjoy is in this movie. Alfie Allen.
Yeah, he is,
very hateable.
He's very hateable. He's just like the punk kid of this Russian mafia czar.
Mm-hmm.
And he's obviously grown up, you know, with all this wealth and privilege. He has this attitude that he's untouchable and he can just like bully people for the sake of it. And then he bullies the wrong person, you know, like.
Alfie Allen was brilliant as Theon Greyjoy in Game of Thrones, and a big part of what sold that character so immediately is that he does have just a very, like, punchable face.
Yes, he does.
You know? I mean, he seems like a lovely guy in real life, but
he's like a lovely guy, but I am gonna fucking punch him in the face when I see him.
He has a very punchable face, and he's very good at emphasizing reasons to hate him. He's just very good in that kind of role, and so you see him in this and you're like, oh, this punk kid, and you're like, I can't wait to see him get his. You even have the lawyer, Theon Greyjoy's father's lawyer, who's like one of the baddies in this, is Dean Winters. He was in 30 Rock, but you probably recognize him more from like, I can't remember which brand it is, the car insurance commercials.
I think they're like,
where he's like mischief.
Yeah.
He's like the thing that goes wrong and kind of, you know, like, and he's very like smarmy, you know?
He's very funny in this movie too, because he's very smarmy and also like, he's the one who's, like, the most afraid of John Wick, you know?
He's the least competent in this area, you know?
Yeah.
He's evil, but he's like a lawyer.
Right, yeah, exactly.
He doesn't know how to fight, you know? He doesn't know how to, he's not experienced at killing people with his own hands, you know? He doesn't do that. It's like as much as Alfie Allen gets in over his head, at least he's actually done wet work and shit before.
Yeah.
Adrienne Palicki is in this. She was in Friday Night Lights, Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
A rival assassin who takes on Viggo's bounty that he puts on John Wick. And Viggo even tells people, part of his terms is they can ignore the rules of the Continental and just do it there.
Which is, that's used as a big plot point because that's a part of the world building, is we know there's this hotel. We know this hotel has these very strict rules. We know that they're very supportive of their guests and any of their needs, whether it be doctors or weapons or clothing, they can provide. It's the character we mentioned, Lance Reddick's character.
It's supposed to be
is very much like the concierge that gets shit done for you.
Yes, and it's supposed to be neutral territory because it's supposed to be a place where assassins can rest and get what they need, and they're not supposed to be fighting each other in the hotel.
Yeah, no business on the hotel grounds, you know? That's kind of the rule that everybody lives by. And Viggo, in his desperation, is saying he'll pay more if an assassin is willing to do it on the Continental grounds, where John Wick thinks he's safe between his assaults, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Because Viggo is trying to catch John Wick by surprise, obviously.
And Ms. Perkins, played by Adrienne Palicki, is the one who takes that offer.
Yes.
So They do a good job of setting her up and just making her really hateable. And they also set up the idea of like, she's doing something incredibly dangerous. And you know this because the characters keep saying, there's no business on the hotel grounds. There's no killing on the hotel grounds. And you have to follow these rules, you know?
And she doesn't care.
Yeah.
You know, and it's funny too because towards the end of the movie, like, her character was going to carry over to what the plot of the second film or something, like she's gonna be a loose end from this. Nope, she's wrapped up. Ian McShane shows up with a bunch of his men and kills her for violating the rules of the Continental. He says, like, your membership has been revoked.
Yeah. They have to do that.
Yeah.
They have to do that because they have to show that when you hear about these rules, that these rules have teeth.
Yes.
And so they have to do that. And in order to show that these, like, effectively in a movie, to show that this is like a real thing, or like that this is a real threat, that you have to follow these rules, and to give a reason why you have to follow these rules, you have to have a character like Miss Perkins who's going to violate the rules. Yeah. It's like important that you have that so that you can show what happens when you violate the rules.
And show that the consequences exist.
Exactly. So 2 other actors I really want to bring up here just because they're also fantastic in these kind of roles is, first we have John Leguizamo, Luigi.
Yes. He is the owner of a chop shop at like the beginning of the movie where Alfie Allen's character takes John Wick's car, try to get money for like scraps or parts or whatever from it. And he's the one who immediately recognizes who that car belongs to. And he's the one who calls his father and gives him the head up that John Wick might be a little bit pissed off.
Well, this is our first introduction to anybody talking about John Wick being this crazy, badass, scary figure, because we had just seen him get his ass kicked when he was surprised at night and his puppy killed and all this stuff. He didn't fight back. He didn't have, like, he wasn't taking on his attackers. He was just a victim. And then while John Leguizamo is going over how much he fucked up, and when he calls like the guy's dad and mentions it, and like you see the fear in their eyes and stuff, as that's happening, it's cutting back and forth between that and showing Keanu Reeves as John Wick, like using a sledgehammer on his floor, getting his gold coins out, stocking up his weapons, taking a shower where you see his like back and all the tattoos on him and stuff. And it's like, oh shit. Yeah, these people messed with the wrong guy. That's kind of like the point that they really hammer home. As we said, it's a very economical movie. So and as you said, very unsubtle. So his character is used as like an exposition balm to show that initial shock moment of, you fucked with who?
Yeah, exactly.
And then the other actor I wanted to point out is David Patrick Kelly, who was in Twin Peaks, and he was also in The Crow. He played T-Bird in The Crow. And he's the cleaner. He's like a very, Mike from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul type role. He's the guy that comes in and cleans up the messes. And that's another part of the world building. The idea, like, the way they use, like, coded language. Like, oh, I have, I need to plan a meal for, like, 5 dinner guests or something. And that's, like, how many bodies they need to clean up or whatever, All that coded language. There's also, like, the police officer that visits John and is like, are you back in the game?
Yeah. It's like, everything good? It's like, everything's good. You have a good night. Like, he saw the body. It's like, yeah.
Well, that's the thing is, cause like initially you see the police and you're like, oh, typical movie, they're gonna have, he's gonna have to hide the fact that this is happening. The police officer is gonna be wary of it. No, the police officer is in on this whole thing. He knows what's going on. He knows who John Wick is.
Yeah.
He doesn't get involved. He's just checking to see if there's like, if there is an issue that he needs to, get around at some point. He's like, do I have to worry about anything here? That's basically his role, like when he shows up, is just that.
Yeah.
So, trying to think of where to go from here now. We talked about the Continental, we talked about all the mythology around John Wick's character, the Baba Yaga, the boogeyman. Yeah, which is also funny that the term Baba Yaga popped up in like maybe like 15 places at the same time. And like, that's a real kind of boogeyman ghost story from like Eastern Europe. That's like a real name. That's not something created.
Well, yeah, I know that.
I know, I'm just saying like, but that name popped up in like a bunch of things around the same time.
Oh, really? really? Okay.
Yeah, because besides this, they had in Ant-Man, there's the one guy who's like Eastern European that's on the crew. The guy that's played by the polka dot man from from the Suicide Squad.
Okay.
The same actor. But anyways, he like when they would talk about some mysterious thing and he'd get all superstitious and he'd go, "It's the Baba Yaga." Like he'd saying that all the time. And at the same time there was a Russian metal band that kind of blew up with a song called Baba Yaga as well. That like, so it's like all these kind of, it's one of those weird things. Like something will come out, it'll hit the public consciousness and suddenly it's everywhere. The
idea was just in the air at the time.
Yeah, it just happened to be everywhere at that point. It's kind of like when a movie comes out, like all of a sudden like a movie will come out with a very specific theme and then like 3 other movies will come out around the same time that are like the same theme. Like when Armageddon came out and also Deep Impact, you know? How like you'd always get those kind of things where it's like, why are there 2 disaster movies about destroying asteroids headed towards Earth coming out within a month of each other? Like what's going on? It's kind of like that with the term Baba Yaga. Another big part of this movie, besides guns and knives and plots about revenge, it's cars. Because, again, this movie was made by stuntmen. And one of the biggest types of stunts in movies are car stunts. So, of course, this movie's also going to have some badass, crazy car stunts going on in it. And you're also going to have John Wick's going to have his signature car, which is the one that's stolen from him at the beginning, a 1969 Ford Mustang Mach 1. And that's the one that's easily recognizable by John Leguizamo's character because it's just an iconic car. But that's something you're going to get from stunt performers making a movie.
Right,
all the things that they relate to are going to be like heightened and highlighted here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So before we move on to talking about kind of the influences and where this is going with other stuff, is there anything else you want to say about the movie itself?
I mean, there's not much more to say about the movie itself. It's pretty standard boilerplate action movie plot-wise. Like, the plot is like, John Wick is awesome. Obviously, he gets the bad guys in the end, and he gets sort of like his happy ending, or he gets a new dog, and it ends there.
He goes from Beagle to Pitbull.
I think the most interesting thing about the movie, besides like the action sequences, which are well done, like it delivers on the action scenes, which is what you're there for. So like it should, obviously. But yeah, it does. Like it has like very stylish action scenes, like we've mentioned. I think what it also delivers on is like introducing this kind of like intriguing, this world of assassins that, you know, like you only get hints of it in this movie. You only see the surface, you know, like it kind of makes you want to...
It's in your peripheral.
Yeah, it kind of makes you want to dive deeper into that world, but you don't get to do it in this movie, which is fine because like there's not like 3 more movies to follow it, so it's cool.
Yeah, the 4th movie is coming out next month, I believe, so.
But that's all I have to say about the film itself.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that, like I said, this kind of picked up the mantle of like these kind of gun action type movies and kind of like took it to its next step with this franchise. But it also like, not just with the franchise itself, it influenced a lot of other movies, you know, going forward are going to be like John Wick likes in the same way that you have Soulsborne likes and roguelikes and video games, you know, they're going to have John Wick like movies. And some of the ones we've seen are the writer of John Wick did a movie called Nobody that starred Bob Odenkirk. That is another like John Wick like similar kind of ideas. You have this kind of guy, he's mostly mild-mannered, he keeps to himself, but somebody fucks with him and then they quickly realize they fucked with the wrong guy. And then you add in some world building and stuff because an important lesson that this movie teaches for like a writing standpoint is that world building isn't just for fantasy movies. Like if you're going to make a fantasy movie or fantasy series, fantasy book, you have to do a lot of world building because it's not set in our world. So you have to like you have to set the parameters of how this world works, you know? And it's something that you get a lot in fantasy. You get a little bit in science fiction as well, but you don't usually get too much of it besides that because people just assume like, oh, well, you know.
Oh yeah, it's our world. But this is like, this is set in our world and everything, obviously. But what they're doing is they're establishing an underworld, a world beneath our world that only these characters are privy to.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Where everything's heightened.
Yes.
And it's taken to like another level or something. And that's kind of like what this genre of movies now is like taking on. So you're going to get these elements popping up in movies like Nobody, or, I mean, the whole basis of Violent Night is that, you know, it's about Santa Claus.
Yes, yeah.
But they basically said, okay, well, let's do kind of Die Hard with Santa Claus, but then we'll borrow what John Wick was doing. We'll like add in kind of mythology, like what's the background of this guy? Why is this guy so badass? We have to give clues to that, you know? This guy in this case being like Santa Claus for Violent Night, you know? But like you get those kind of elements. This is kind of where John Wick is influencing other movies, is this kind of stuff. That's you fucked with the wrong guy and taking it to the next level kind of thing, which I personally love because, as I've mentioned here many times, I'm a big fan of comeuppance.
Right.
I love it in movies or shows where somebody is just horrible and they're gonna get their comeuppance for being horrible.
You're a big fan of karma.
Exactly. I want to see it happen. I want to see somebody get what's coming to them. And it's just cathartic because you don't get that in the real world that often. Somebody does something fucked up and evil, you don't usually get any justice for it in our world. Maybe you'll hear something, but like it's never satisfying. And so you want that catharsis in your fiction, you know, and you want to take it to extremes because it is fiction and because they can take it to that ridiculous, preposterous degree. But yeah, it's influencing kind of everything now, so we're going to be seeing a lot more John Wick-likes in the future.
I mean, that makes sense. When something comes out and it's really popular, it does really well. It inspires imitators.
Remember after The Matrix came out and how bullet time was like everywhere?
Oh yeah, I remember that. Like everybody had to be doing that. Like it was parodied.
Everybody was wearing sunglasses and black trench coats.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the kind of thing that's what this is, you know, like we're going to be seeing, if you're going to watch a big action movie, there's going to be a scene where you find out, oh, they fucked with the wrong guy. There's going to be that moment, you know, there's going to be a scene where he like takes off his shirt and he's got all these like crazy tattoos and you're like, oh, where did those come from? You know?
Funny thing was like, that wasn't even like unique to John Wick, like when it came out. Though.
No, it's just
plenty of
like
other
concentrated.
Was like that. Yeah, exactly.
I think the first movie I really remember seeing that kind of scene where they showcased tattoos as being badass was that Cape Fear.
Oh, yeah.
Where they had the scene where he was working out, you know, and you see all the kind of the tattoos across his knuckles and the scales of justice on his back or whatever.
Yeah,
like,
to like really emphasize like this is a bad guy.
Yeah, like, yeah, exactly. So in a sense, you could say Scorsese paved the way for this kind of movie, as odd as it is. But yeah,
this is cinema.
Yeah, exactly. So but that's what John Wick is with everything. I mean, like, you know, the kind of brutal accuracy of using knives or like using guns in close quarters and fights and stuff, that also isn't really new to John Wick. It's just John Wick took all those elements and refined them to like the most brutal and efficient core and then like strung them together and made a movie out of it. Which is just, it works, it's good, it's gonna be entertaining, and then at a certain point we're probably gonna get sick of it, just like all the rip-offs of, The Matrix that we got, you know, by around 2008 we were like really sick of those. So that's probably what's gonna end up happening, and then somebody else will rewrite the rules and make something new that's exciting, and we'll all get on board with that.
Yeah, exactly. That's the cycle, you know, yeah, exactly.
So that's pretty much it, right?
Yeah, I don't have any more talking points, unless you do.
No, that's it for me. So next week we're going to be talking about The Last of Us again. As I mentioned, we're going to be talking about the two most recent episodes. That's episode 6 and 7, I believe, right? We watched 4 and 5 last week is what we talked about. So it's episode 6 and 7 of The Last of Us. We'll be talking about those next week. So look forward to that. Until then, you can reach me on Twitter. I'm at Tyson Gifford. You can reach Will. He is at Voxel Hero. You can visit our website, thetotalscreen.com. If you open up one of our container stories for one of our podcast episodes, you'll find all of the relevant links down there within the article to our SoundCloud page, our Facebook page, our personal Twitters, which I've just mentioned. The names of all that stuff is going to be in the container our stories as well, so you can check those out. You can also subscribe to our podcast on your podcast kind of choice, like Apple Podcast or Pocket Cast. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you for listening to the OnScreen podcast, the official podcast of The Total Screen. Visit our website at thetotalscreen.com. This podcast can be found on any major podcast client, including Pocket Cast and Apple Podcast. The entire backlog of this podcast and other content can be found on our YouTube channel.